Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
So hi, Steph.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, everybody.
Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects. We were going to do a different topic and we weren't really feeling it. And then I suggested, or we talked about waste, and I got really excited about talking about wasting food.
Yeah, you jumped right on. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
let's go.
I just feel like this is such a challenge for a lot of people. And I think following on from the trauma episode last week, I've worked with people that at the real visceral level, it feels almost impossible. Like their body, everything about them says no about throwing some food away, even if their mind is saying that it's okay.
Mm.
And of course, there's ethical considerations around wasting food. So I think it's a bit of a minefield that people might find it useful for us to unpick a little bit.
Yeah, I'm more interested in having a conversation because my brain gets a bit stuck around this topic. So I'm glad that you're so energetic about it. What are your thoughts? Is this something you personally feel or felt?
Yes, I certainly don't like wasting food, and it used to be much harder for me to do. The way I tend to talk about it is that for most of us, for most people listening to this podcast, I don't want to make assumptions for everyone because, food scarcity is still a real thing for many people. But for a lot of people, certainly for me and people that I work with, our lives are set up in a way that there is always going to be excess food. Even if it's just going to a restaurant or going somewhere and the portions are outside of your control, there's going to be excess food. And if you can't throw out excess food, if you have to eat it, let's say that you're in that mindset where it's like, I can't throw the food away, I have to eat it. When you're stuck in that, the food will always dictate when the eating experience ends.
Right.
It won't be your choice. It won't be your decision. It's another external thing that's going on. I often talk about it as a skill to develop because you're learning something new. If you've grown up with those messages around food waste is bad, you finish your plate, all of those kinds of things, those messages would have come in really young, like pre-verbal young, which is why I think it's so inside someone's nervous system, sometimes this real aversion, because sometimes one of the things I do with my clients is I set them a task that at meal times to throw away a bite of food. And sometimes we talk about trying to do it at the end, sometimes even at the beginning. The deal is you can always go and get more food. This is never about you have to throw some away and then you have to stop eating. You can go and have something else. But the idea is to put like a mouthful, even half a mouthful of food in the bin. And the struggle, I would say, for the majority of people that try to do this is immense. How do you think you would feel given that task?
Now? Yeah, I could do that. I didn't grow up with a clean your plate mentality at all. And my mom liberally threw food away because we always had excess food. And still, my mom makes a ton of food all the time. Like she's one of those people, you go to her house and she's got like 5 different things she can pull out of her freezer. Like she makes use of it in that she'll freeze it for times when she needs it, but there's always too much. So I can picture her scraping food into the garbage. And to me, that's how I grew up. So that wasn't a thing for me. And it's still not. It's almost like my body is totally fine with that. It's my mind that is like, you should care more about that. Read the headlines.
I think there are certain things for me that are harder to throw away than others. Food that's gone off, no problem. I'll feel a bit disappointed that I didn't get to use it, but the actual throwing it away is not an issue. And that's probably a lot of people feel like that as well. Not everybody. And so I don't like throwing away meat. Like on my plate. If it's cooked, it's part of my plate and I'm getting quite full. To throw away meat still has that sense of being wrong because it feels like, from
the animal. Yeah.
The animal. And it's often, in my mind, considered the main component perhaps of a meal for me, and vegetables as well. So throwing away the starches, potatoes, rice, pasta, any of that stuff has, I think, pretty much always felt fairly comfortable for me, but it was certain foods that would be harder to throw away. And then I know we spoke about this on our Q&A sessions that we did for our community members, that idea of destroying binge foods. Did
Right.
you do that? Did you throw binge foods away and make
Oh,
sure that,
yes. I saturated them under the sink before throwing them away, or put ketchup all over them before I would throw them away.
oh, I might have still ate it with the ketchup on, to
I
be
think
fair.
I've done it.
Uh-huh. I would
But
spray it with cleaning fluid.
yeah, then you can't go back.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some
Yeah.
people still advocate that as a way of as a good
Cutting
thing
it
to
off.
do. I mean, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on doing that? On destroying food that perhaps you're feeling out of control around it, you're trying to stop yourself from binging on it?
Um, Things like destroying them, like simply throwing it in the trash is different to me than putting cleaning solution on it or mixing it up in the trash on purpose. There's to me that is all that says back to me is I don't trust you. I don't trust you. I don't trust you. I don't trust you. Me, meaning me.
Mhm.
um, and that connotes something else that then there's another layer going on. Then it's starting a whole conversation in my head. But simply throwing something away because it's like, I don't need this around anymore and being really impulsive around it and I'm done with it really. I'll just like throw the rest away to me is okay. As long as it's not heavily emotionally charged
Mhm.
and as long as there's not actual hunger and restriction going on. I do that sometimes, but not the other. Like to do that is like there's something else there.
Yeah. Well, when my binging was really out of control, I can remember definitely doing that. You know what it's like in a binge where I have to get rid of all the food.
Yeah.
And there would be occasions where I physically couldn't eat all the food and I didn't want it there. It's that idea
Mm.
often in a binge about wanting to get rid of the food. And I can remember that spraying it with some cleaning fluid and putting it in the bin and then just like feeling like I could breathe again.
Yeah.
So I would
Yeah.
never advocate it as, oh, this is just do this. I think this is a really good thing to do. I don't think that, but I do think in those moments, it served a purpose for me to put
Yes.
something to bed, to just kind of not have to be negotiating with myself over this food
Yeah.
anymore.
I get that. I guess I'm looking at it from my lens now of like to me that would feel oh, makes me feel sad. Where you were talking about, like, throwing meat away and vegetables and things like that, what about, like, in I guess, like, clarifying because I save a lot of food. Like, sometimes when there's leftover, I feel at this point where I'm like, "I spent time making this for everybody." It drives me crazy when my kids leave so much on their plates because 'cause I'm like, "I just that was a lot of effort and time," and so now it's going into the Pyrex, like, I'm putting it into my containers, and we're gonna have that tomorrow, and leftovers to me don't gross me out, like, that's something I will happily have the next day, and I feel like, "Okay, good." So, what are the qualifications of where there is left food left over? Like, it can be repurposed, but where's that line of, like, I can repurpose this food and that feels fine, or I gotta get rid of it? Like, why would we have to get rid of it? In what situations would that be more of the dilemma?
Well, if I'm doing a meal for myself at home and I don't want to eat all of it, it's never going to be enough for a
Mm,
leftover meal. Because if it's one meal and there's some of it that I don't want, I suppose it's different when you're saying the kids have left loads. You can get a meal out of it, and leftovers don't gross me out at all. It's really nice to have leftovers. Be like, oh, I've got some leftovers for tomorrow. Restaurants as well. I think you guys do it in the US a little bit more, like asking for food to be boxed up to
yeah.
take away with you.
Mhm.
There's a line for that with me. At what point it's worth it. So when you and I went out in New York, like we had loads of food left over, absolutely worth it, and we had another meal out of it. It was
Yeah.
great.
I think we had 2.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, there was still food left over. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas that's not always necessarily going to be possible, or something that just might not be as nice the next day for some people.
Mm. Well, as you're talking now, I'm also thinking about now this is much more of a clear-cut decision, but back then, for most of my life, it was like, I don't want leftovers because I know what I'm gonna do with them. Leftovers were hard for me to keep around. I think we also talked about this in a membership call. Like, if there's leftovers, I'm gonna eat them. There's something about them that isn't real or something that's like, I could just finish that. I felt like that a lot with pasta. When I would see pasta in the container in the fridge, it was like especially if it wasn't a whole meal's worth, or actually didn't matter. It was just like, I could just eat this. It's not real. It's like, it's leftover. It's for the taking. No one's gonna notice. And so I would know, like, so then my instinct would be like, I don't want this left over. I'm gonna eat it all up right now. Because I think scarcity played into that. Because it was like, I know that if I don't eat this now, it's going in the garbage. I'm gonna get rid of this so that I don't eat it tomorrow. This is mental restriction.
Mhm.
And so as a result, I'd be like, well, then I'm going to finish it all right now because I already knew that I was going
Mhm.
to be depriving myself of it tomorrow. Because and not even intentional deprivation, was more like, I just don't trust myself. I just don't wanna go into a binge place. But the whole thing gets wrapped up in a sense of scarcity, and so I would just then wanna eat it all right now.
Yeah. And it's exactly what permission is trying to do, right? That's the Last Supper eating. I'm thinking of certain stages in my recovery where I still didn't want to have the food in the house. So even though I thought to myself, okay, I can have this tomorrow, I would be thinking, but I don't want it just sitting there in the cupboard. I'd want to go and get it. This was something I was trying to create these sort of pauses and a little bit of time to think and to just check in with myself about what was going on. There were absolutely times where I still felt, okay, I do have permission to have this again tomorrow, but I wanted to set that gap for myself about going out and getting it because there would be something, and this happened over and over again, where let's say, my binges were becoming less frequent, but I would have a binge and then there would be some of that food left over. And I would go like, okay, I can keep that till tomorrow. And then tomorrow morning, going back to that food and that derailing me again and kind of going back into a binge. And I did get caught into that cycle quite a few times. So I did go through periods, even like at this stage, of having binged and being like, I am going to get rid of this food. I don't want it in the house, and that's not me saying I can't have it tomorrow, but I don't want it that close to me tomorrow. And I know that's something that ideally we want to be able to move through to have a more neutral relationship with those foods so that you can have them around. But I think there are stages
Mm.
sometimes for some people where they can't get to that stage as quickly as it seems to apparently be possible in the way that some people talk about it. I did become more comfortable at throwing food away, and I think I mentioned this, I think one episode, really, because it stands out in my mind because I think it was the only time I did it, where I went into a shop and I bought a load of binge food, and I got out and I was, like, already coming down from the high of getting my binge food and being like, "I don't want it," and that would happen often, but it would be like, "I've got it, so I've gotta get it done," and on this one occasion, I put the whole bag of food in the public bin, so I was on the street,
Mm.
and
Did
that
you
felt
regret it after?
no, I felt
No?
relieved. I felt absolute relief.
Did it come back, the binge urge?
Not that day. No,
Huh, okay.
no.
I've done that too.
Mhm.
It's like I have this moment after, but then it would end up coming back, like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But is it the guilt that prevents us from like, what is the guilt about? Or what is the "I don't wanna throw food away" about?
There are people out there that don't have enough, so it feels really there's something a bit ick about that, isn't there?
Mm,
About throwing food away when there might be other people actually going hungry, even though it's not like you're gonna be able to give that food directly to someone else who's
yeah.
hungry. I just think it brings into this sort of wider sense of morality for people, which I get and I feel that too. But I also recognize, and once I started thinking of it, well, excess food is excess food wherever it goes. It was
Yeah.
still excess.
I think that's how I've always wrapped my head around it, this idea of it's not going it's gonna be here anyway in the bins in this it's just not going anywhere purposeful whether I eat it or not, or whether I've purchased it and eat it versus throw it in the bin or not. It's not changing. To me, then it would bring up this whole like, well, then the shame would come in around like, I can't believe I do this. It wasn't really about that moment. It was just like, oh, that I need to buy this much food. Like that's the problem.
Mhm.
But wasting it or eating it is both to me was wasting it.
Yeah. But it's really interesting to see the way that different people handle the task of throwing a bite of food away. Because I also do this with when I do training for therapists, I do it with them. So they're with me for a weekend, and on the Saturday, their homework is that meal time that they have to throw a bite of food in the bin. Just one occasion, one night. And I get people to really reflect on their initial reaction at that request. Anger comes up sometimes at the request, even horror, confusion, like, "Well, what's the point? What on earth could be the point of that?" And then there'll be people who will come back and they'll say, "I just kept forgetting. I just kept forgetting." Like, I'd remember and then I would forget.
Huh.
And another one would be, throwing away a piece of food they don't like, deliberately taking a piece of food they didn't like to get rid of that. I've had people like be like, well, I threw my kids' food in the bin and that counts. And all these different ways, how we negotiate with ourselves. And then there'll be the few people who's like, I did it. I did it every time. I did it and it was difficult, but I did it. And I'm like, it's not about whether you managed to do it or not. It's almost like they're trying to be the good client who does the homework. I'm just much more interested in the experience. It's such an opportunity to provoke stuff that can then be explored.
Like what?
Like what goes on in your body? What does your mind say about this? For many, it's this sort of visceral reaction, and even finding that reaction, connecting to their bodies to feel this visceral reaction, what their minds say about it, how they negotiate with themselves. Just getting curious about staying with that resistance, because quite often we feel resistance and then we just turn around in the other direction and we're just like, whoa, we find a way to avoid resistance. And it's not about, I'm not saying to you, you have to force your way through this resistance. I'm like, can you feel this resistance and just stay with it? Stay with that, stay with that discomfort. Whether you do it or not, I don't really care. I just want them to have the experience of what happens when you try to do this and what gets brought up for you. If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode. I think I'm more likely to feel that resistance throwing food away. I know that I feel it when I empty my kids' lunchboxes. This is going to happen much more than would ever happen with my own plate. I'm totally comfortable with throwing my own thing away, unless I'm very hungry and you're taking away my last bite. But, you said I can go get more? Fine.
Exactly.
Okay.
I sometimes tell people to dish up more on their plate in the knowledge that they're going to throw a bite away.
That's not an issue for me. But when I empty their lunchboxes and I've opened it and like 3/4 of it is there, but it's all like messy and it's gotten hummus everywhere, it's like I have to throw it away. That brings up resistance to me, I think, because there's this like, I just made it, like, like you just waste, and the waste of that, like I just bought, like, I think having this a more appreciation for that, because it's like I go grocery shopping, take like, so like it's an effort, but there's a resistance. And I remember like the instinct would be eat it quickly, because that actually gets rid of the resistance. It makes the decision. So it's like the impulse to just do it quick. Like, okay, now it's gone. Now I don't have to worry about it. I think that's a way of not being able to sit with the resistance. And like the decision just gets made before my consciousness can catch up. Which is, I guess, what you're getting at.
Yeah. But I think this really comes down to like early relationships with your caregivers, and this thing that I think it happens very young, and I think we carry it into adult, and that we see love and approval as the same thing. So we become these little approval hungry things, desperate for this approval. And if you have parents who are disapproving if you don't finish your food and approving when you do, because like how much, when parents are feeding their kids, how delighted they are when their kids are eating their food, and do you see what I mean? And all of that gets felt, this sort of reinforcement. So what happens for quite a few people when they're trying to throw food away is this sense that they're doing something so terribly wrong that they don't really have words for, because if they try to put words on it, it just sounds like it doesn't make sense, because how can it feel this big when we're talking about one bite of food in the bin? But it does, because that loss of approval can feel like rejection. It can feel like unlovability, unworthiness, all of these things that are deep, deep down, that I think can be part of this resistance for some people around not making themselves eat food that they don't want to eat, that their bodies are going, I don't want this. And even their minds are kind of going, I need to just get this eaten, even though I know I'm not enjoying it anymore.
What about like the last bit in the container? Have you ever eaten, I don't know, like a pint of ice cream and it's like, well, I might as well just finish the rest because it's not enough to put back and I don't want to throw it away? Or the last bit of anything, like where there's just a little left, where you're talking about, and it's not enough for a meal or a snack. So what do you do with it? And the instinct, I think, is to just finish it up rather than throw it away.
Yeah. And that absolutely being an option. But if throwing it away isn't an option as well, or putting it back isn't an option as well, you're not really making a choice to carry on eating it if the others don't feel like options too.
Mhm. What do you do with it personally?
And that depends on the moment. Sometimes I might just eat it. Sometimes I might put it back. Sometimes I might throw it away. I
Yeah.
can't say in advance what that would be, but all those options feel viable to me. I'm happy to have leftovers. I'm okay with throwing something away, and I'm okay with eating something because it's the last bit, and I'm happy to eat it up as well. So I don't
Yeah.
know that I would really be overthinking that in the way that,
Mm.
well, in the past it would have just been like it has
Eat.
to be eaten.
I think my instinct is to eat it, but it takes more of that pause for me to throw it away. It's not as the choices aren't equal. I don't feel guilty about it eating it if I do. And I will throw it away if I have half a second, just a millisecond of like, oh yeah, that's an option. But it's not, I think that there's one that comes first for me, like the instinct being to eat it. But I think that also comes from a part of my personality. So I think at one time it was coming from scarcity, but also there's a part of it that's like, there's something neater about it. And we've talked about this weird organization thing. So like if there's a bit left of something, I don't want to put a container away with just a bit of something in it. I only like containers. So my neuroses is coming through more and more. And I needed my jars to be full or like at least half full. Otherwise it feels like a waste of space. There's something about that that's not organized for me. So that would be more of my impetus to either finish it. It's either it's black and white a bit, but like got to be gone, or it can't take up room.
I think in that moment for me, it's about how will I feel. So if it's like, I don't know, another 5 or 6 bites of ice cream, I'm going to just eat the ice cream. It's fine. I'm not going to
It's also
feel
ice cream.
Yeah, and my body's not going to feel unpleasant after that. So that for me is probably where the line is. And something that I used to do that I did actually find really helpful, and I feel like I have to be careful about how I talk about this, is that sometimes when I'd been feeling really out of control with food, something that occasionally worked at getting myself back into balance was throwing a tiny bit away of everything I ate. So it was still being allowed to eat as much as I wanted, but it would be like, eating a banana and just leaving the very last bit in the bottom of the banana and throwing it away. Or having a meal and it being like the smallest bite left at the end and throwing it away. What it felt like was going on for me at the moment, because I also see how that can sound like this very kind of controlling thing around food. But what I was experiencing at that time was it was a real reassurance for me that there was plenty of food because I could throw a bit away. It was really reassuring to me. Like it made me feel less about this idea of running out or not having enough.
Huh.
And I could always go and have more. So I might have a banana, leave a little bit, and then go and have a sandwich and leave a little bit. It was never about I have to stop eating the minute I
Right.
leave a little bit. But there was something, I don't know if one, it made me a bit more conscious because I did it at the end. And it also felt like I was the one stopping eating as opposed to the food was just gone. So it was something about, and I've sometimes spoken about it in terms of grieving the end of a meal,
Yeah.
like the end of an eating experience. Sometimes it can be a sense of sadness that the food's gone and you wanted more because it was just good or you were still hungry or whatever it was. And there was something for me around being the one to put the bit of food in the bin that made it feel kind of okay because it felt like I'd chosen it as opposed to this sense of loss that the food was gone.
Yeah.
It's something quite deep going on there for me.
Yeah. But I feel like you can't do that if you're a restrictor.
No, and I
No.
wasn't.
Yeah.
Certainly not at that time. Mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because that makes me feel angsty.
yeah. And it had the opposite. It was so calming for me.
Mm. But I was also a binger.
Yeah.
I guess I could see it from both angles.
Do you want to play a little game?
Yeah. I love
Okay.
games.
You're not Googling. Are you Googling food waste? You need to come out of that
Okay, fine.
immediately, just in case it comes up.
Immediately.
But immediately.
Okay.
Do you want to have a guess at the top 5 most wasted food items?
Yes, I'd love to actually. How many guesses do I get? All right, right here I go.
Well, there's 5. So let's see how many you get in 10.
Bread.
That is number 1.
Ah.
Congratulations.
Yes. Hamburger.
No,
Okay. Would it be like vegetables or do I have to be more specific? Is it
it's more
specific?
specific than that, yeah.
Carrots,
No,
onions,
no,
chicken.
no. You started so well.
I know. Bagels.
No, probably comes under bread. I'll let you have another one.
Okay. Salad.
No,
Well,
it's not even a salad item that's on there.
what is eggs?
No,
Beans.
no.
Apples.
Yes!
Yeah.
Apples is at number 5. You've got one more guess.
Milk.
Yes, that was number 2. So you got number 1, 2, and 5. That's not bad going.
What else is on there?
So at number 3, we have potatoes.
Okay.
I wonder if that includes things like fries as well and all the
It
derivatives
must.
of potatoes. And at number 4 is cheese.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's 5. I got 10 guesses. Got it. You know what else is berries? I throw away so many berries because they get mold on them.
Yeah, the last thing I threw away was strawberries.
Well, that was a fun game. Wait, say them again in order. Say them.
Was bread, milk, potatoes, cheese, and apple.
I think there's a reason that those, like bread is just so plentiful. Is that why? It's like you said, you have an easier time throwing away things like that than meat or vegetables.
Yeah, I think, yeah, because it's such a staple and
Yeah, there's
bread,
enough.
yeah, you tend to buy them in big loaves and I have to keep bread in the freezer because I don't eat
Yeah.
enough of it. And milk just sounds pretty standard. I didn't know if you'd guess milk because I guess it's whether it's a drink or a food, but
Yeah.
I get that because everyone buys milk and milk often goes off.
Yeah. It's like more plentiful.
And again, potatoes probably includes a lot of stuff. And then apples. So apples is kind of the big produce that gets
I
thrown
think
away.
that's to me because also I feel like apples are something that feels very abundant. Like it's
Mhm.
such a staple item. It's a staple fruit too. Like throwing away watermelon to me, which I don't get as much during the year, and it just feels more like a novelty. You know, I think at this point, many of us have heard like, well, eating it is still wasting it, right? Like if you're eating it and you don't need it, you're still wasting it. This was a common battle cry of like Weight Watchers meetings and things. But the compulsion remains. So why is that? And what's a way around that as far as if we know we are eating something and if it feels like the same as throwing it out or stuffing it in, right? Why do we continue to do that?
Well, there's a difference, I guess, here between when you're doing it in a compulsion and when you're doing it like in a less compulsive way. And I know a big thing for me that then could lead to a binge would be feeling really like uncomfortably full was often a trigger
It is. Why
for a
is that?
binge.
Just take it
I
over there
think,
for a second.
yeah, I think it brings up a lot of catastrophic thinking. So I think if you catastrophize feeling full and there's part of you that panics about that and believes it's wrong, um, that you feel like you've messed up. It's that it just hits that sort of what the hell effect.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's something kind of in that fullness. For me, feeling over full felt like I'd already messed up. So I might as well take this opportunity to go and do,
Mm-hmm.
go and binge. So that was why learning how to stop at a place where I felt good, where I felt full and I want to feel full. And I think feeling full is a great thing to get comfortable with and to experience and to seek out. And then there's that beyond fullness where you feel like you're eating food that you don't even really want. And in this case, when we're talking about waste, because you can't waste it, as opposed to you might be eating food that perhaps part of you doesn't want because you're in a binge.
Yeah.
And maybe that's an important distinction to make here. Because it's not like being okay with waste is just going to get rid of all binging. Because the minute you go into, you're like, it's
Right.
okay, I can just throw the food away.
Right. But where it intersects, I think is important. It's like it can create that overfullness, which can then prompt a binge.
Yeah. And all those thoughts of feeling like you're out of control, regret, guilt, shame,
Yeah.
all those feelings that can come along just from feeling over full. And it's those emotions that could then sort of
Yeah.
propelled me
That's a good
towards a
flow chart.
binge.
That's a good takeaway from this episode, I think. Is
Cool.
noticing the effect, the impact of eating because we don't want to waste something, that might cause overfullness, that can be associated with a binge and then actually precipitate one.
Mhm.
Those are actually distinct operations that may feel like one.
And also understanding what a binge is in hindsight and with reflection. So there may have been times when, probably for me as well, because it wasn't always like I was super comfortable with wasting food, where I might have eaten a lot because I didn't want to throw something away. And that would be a different type of binge to eating a lot because of like being compelled by other reasons, emotional or
Hmm.
restriction. So I think it's another way that people are trying to figure out, like, because we were going to do an episode, weren't we, on types of binges.
Yeah.
So this could almost be like another one. It's the
Yeah.
one where you eat the food because you want to get rid of it. Like you don't want to throw it away. And maybe there doesn't seem to be an option to keep it for later, or that doesn't feel like a viable choice in the moment.
Yeah. It's interesting because as you're talking about it, I'm thinking about the way those binges used to feel. And so when it's the original point of, where it's starting, it's coming from a place of ingesting something that I don't really want. So it's like this mismatch between something I desire versus something I don't. The rest of the binge would also be like that. So I would then continue to eating things that I didn't really want. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't even necessarily tasting good. It was just filler food. Um, versus a kind of binge where I was like after something specifically, then it would be like more indulgent, yummy foods.
Mhm.
Whereas those other ones are just like muted foods. I would just keep going.
Yeah. So there's something about it, the possibility it being an option of leaving food, whether it's leaving or throwing it away, that feels like one thread of a comfortable relationship with food. Because if
Mhm.
you can't leave it, if you can't throw it away, you're in this conflict. So for those people that the whom waste feels like this real visceral sense of doing something really wrong, you get given a meal that's perhaps a lot bigger than you want, and part of you kind of goes, "Oh no, look how big that is." And you can't even stop and ask yourself because in your mind it's like, "Well, this is my meal, I have to finish it." Something about finishing as well that could be part of this or could be a separate thing in and of itself.
Yep. All right. Well, if there's more to discuss that we haven't hit on, please feel free to let us know what that's about.
Yeah, and if you struggle with wasting food, I would personally be very curious in what what it is that you think that's
Mm.
about why that might be as challenging as it feels for you, how you understand that. Um, yeah, would be
Yeah,
good to
I
know.
think it's a good question in and of itself. That's a good prompt.
Yeah. Yeah,
Look
just
at.
for you to reflect on yourself. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but
You
if you
could
want
think
to tell
about it without telling Sarah
you
also.
could do. I mean,
It's an
if you
option.
must. It's probably been a hot minute since we have done a review plea.
Yeah, if you could give us a rating and review on the podcast platform of your choice, we would greatly appreciate it. These help us grow and get seen and found from other listeners who might not know that we exist.
Exactly. And it even helps us, another way that it helps us that we might not have thought about is when we're trying to get guests on the show, when
Yeah.
they look up our podcast, you can't see what the download numbers are like. So often people judge the size and credibility of a podcast based on the number of ratings and reviews. It's all these other little ways that it can help support the show.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you want us to talk to Glennon Doyle, you need to, we need to have more ratings and reviews.
Exactly. Exactly. We can get
We
some.
tried, guys.
We do, yeah.
Still waiting. Haven't heard back.
Yeah,
Where
Steph
she's
wrote
these
to
days.
Glennon Doyle, but she's currently ignoring us. So if anybody personally knows her, let's drop us a line. Who else is on our wish list?
Yeah, Adele.
Adele, yeah, she's up there. Alison, so for UK people, Alison Hammond is one that, or Dawn French, two people that I would love to be able to get on this podcast. And they're hard to get hold of. You have to go through their agents.
Who else is? Yeah, let us know who else you want to see. I mean, we ask this pretty regularly in our community, and
Yeah. Because it is helpful for us to go to people and say, oh, our listeners have requested you, because that
mm,
always makes them feel good as well.
yeah.
So if you can request people, then we can use that as part of the bait to lure them in.
Yeah, I'm very, yes. They'll probably be like, oh, well, they asked. So
Oh, well,
their
yeah,
listeners
exactly.
asked. So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
must.
Well, that's
Yes.
what happened with Susie Orbach. She was a request from our membership community. And yeah, I included that in our approach. I said that our members had asked for her.
She's coming up next week.
No, she's been.
Nope. Sorry.
You're showing behind the curtains now how this operation runs.
Whoops. All right, then.
Thank you for listening.
See you next week.
See you next week.